All right. Well, I see our faces. That's always a good sign. I was about to say good morning, but it's afternoon for me and you. So good afternoon, Aista. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm fantastic, thank you, and thank you so much for hanging out with me today. As we were saying on the pre-show, I miss you. I haven't seen you in forever, and so it is so good to finally see your smiling face again. I like to say that it is your world. We are all paying rent, and I eventually will work for you. I'm sure it's just a matter of when. So, what's new? What's happening? What's going on?
Today it's actually like super hot outside.
Uh-oh,
So the cat is hanging out like right behind us, so you
gotcha.
might see the cat at some point.
You'll
What's
probably see one or both of mine eventually.
No, the latest like new and exciting thing is we just did this anonymous gift exchange of
Yeah.
art and writing, and everyone submits it anonymously, and we play this big game of who made what. So we have about like 30 different works that we're trying to do pattern matching and figure out who made what. So like that's super fun and exciting.
See, this reminds me, or maybe even terrifies me a little bit about this class I had in high school, where all semester all we did was study various artists, and everybody had to pick an artist, and then you learned about that person and presented on that person at the end. But the final exam was the teacher flipping through a series of slides of representative, but not necessarily the most famous works from those artists, and you had to figure out which artist was which. So that gives me just a little bit of cold sweat and twitchiness because that was really hard.
So this is like that, and then add in additional like counterfeit works to try
Mm,
to figure out, is someone trying to masquerade as somebody else, or are they trying to tease you in some way to try to get you to guess the wrong person?
exactly, exactly. So, Asta, what's your origin story? How did you get into this crazy world in where our paths collided so many years ago in this space we call architecture? What brought you to software world?
A process of illumination, really. It's not actually a very fancy story. Um, when it was time for me to decide to go to school, I had things lined up on the West Coast, and for many reasons in my life that didn't work out. And I had like a couple of weeks to sign up for class where I could go free at the local community college. And when I looked at the classes of what was available and what I knew how to do, technology was on there. So um, it, it's really not that exciting from that perspective, but I really enjoy more technology as like one piece in the toolbox,
Yeah.
and you might have like many other things in the toolbox, like artistry of many different kinds, or even people interaction and talking, and writing, and like a bunch of other disciplines that might be in the toolbox, and it comes out to help with whatever you might be working on at the time.
Right, right. Yeah, what was the Jobs quote? It's a bicycle for the mind, and I think there's a lot to be said for that, right? It enables a lot of things that we couldn't do. I mean, think about 3D printers. That's an experience you and I've had together, building a 3D printer. I mean, think of the amazing things that you can create that, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, well, I would need to go to a machine shop or I would need to have access to big, expensive equipment to do this. And now, it's I wouldn't say it's commonplace, but it's pretty darn close.
And that's like a funny example. Like when we built the 3D printers, like a friend said, "Oh, we'll be done by 7." And I thought they meant like by 7 p.m., and they meant 7 hours.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
um,
Yeah, there was a lot to that build, to say the least. To say the least. Actually, so Sam Newman was on the show last week, and he has a new 3D printer, but it has apparently a chocolate attachment that I don't know if he has or is going to get, that would allow you to like 3D print fancy chocolate. I thought, ooh, now that would be cool. That would be a fun addition to the home kitchen.
the prosthetics for animals is one of the more interesting
Oh, sure.
use cases that I've seen lately, because you can do that pretty straightforward now.
Sure. Well, it's starting to show up in more commercial applications. The Tour de France just wrapped up yesterday, or Tour de France. I guess that's the one major where, or the one monument where you have to actually say the word the way the host country would. You don't. say the Giro or the Vuelta as with a Spanish or an Italian accent, but you have to apparently say France with a French accent. But they have many of the cyclists will have 3D printed saddles. That's actually something you can get now, and 3D printed bars is also fairly common. It's crazy, isn't it? Just to see how that's changed.
Helmets too.
Yes, yeah, good
So
point.
yeah, because that's a consumer product now. You can scan your head and get your own custom helmet made for you. That's supposed to be safer in some ways.
Sure. Well, I mean, it fits you better as opposed to here's three sizes and then adjust this dial and hope it works. See, I've been waiting for that when it comes to jeans. Not that I've worn jeans now in 16 months, something like that. But I've never had that fun experience of going shopping and finding a pair of pants that actually like fits perfectly. I would pay a shocking amount of money to say, just scan me and make pants that fit me, please. So I eventually will have that future, maybe, probably. I don't know.
Well, there's already a startup that you could wear a pair of shorts. It's basically like a orange centering dot and lines on the shorts, and it scans you with your iPhone or whatever device you
Sure.
have, and then recommends what brands based
Oh,
off of that sizing. So that's been around a couple of
sure.
years. You can do that.
And I know there's at least one company that advertises something where you can take a picture with your iPhone and it will somehow automatically turn that into 31 measurements or something. And then I don't know if they're fully custom or what, but I don't know. Maybe I just need to dig deeper. I don't know. But so we were talking in the pre-show a little bit about sort of this like democratization of technology. And I feel like that's kind of what we're getting around the edges here with this sort of combination of art and creativity and what are your thoughts around that and how that's kind of changed the things you're able to do with the way you're kind of melding these worlds together?
I think it's made it a lot easier. So, like, access to things like AWS and like a lot of hackathons giving away like free AWS credits to build things has made it a lot easier to work with people who have potentially never worked with hardware or software technology before. Like, I was doing a lot of hackathons like before the
Yep.
world shut down, and you could very easily go and work with a group of kids and have it be their first experience working with that technology because it could be stood up very easily
Yep.
and they could get success very quickly. And with like being able to add hardware pieces onto that, like showing them physical light up success of what you're
Yeah.
working on, like it's a lot easier to get excited about working with it if you can tie into something that someone already enjoys.
Right.
So I feel like on one hand, it's made things a lot more accessible. On the other hand, there's the societal implications of things like that. So we were talking a bit about algorithmic bias, and
Hmm.
once you have a lot of people on a platform and using a platform, how can that data be used to then exploit the people who are using it? So that's like major downside of things in some cases being um, more freely available.
You think most people even have a clue how much data there is about us and how rich these profiles are in the world that are being used by these corporations in many cases?
I think they do. I think it's what data are you comfortable with
Sure.
being used? And it, certainly, if you're a person who's marginalized by that data, you understand that inside and out and
Hmm.
how it's being used very, very often um, because like it impacts your day to day life.
Sure. I thought it was interesting when Apple came out with their "Do Not Track Me" button, how quickly certain parts of the technology ecosphere started flipping tables over that. Because how dare you not allow me to track people? It's like, well, no, we're going to give people the choice of whether or not they're tracked. And a unsurprising amount of people have said, actually, I don't want to be tracked. Thank you for asking. So I think it'll be interesting to see as people become more aware of that. Because I think you're right about folks who are or younger who are kind of growing up with these technologies. I worry more about. I think of my in-laws. Do they fully understand how much data is being mined about them, and do they understand the ramifications and the consequences of that?
Because there's also the piece of can information about that be made more easily available in a way that's understandable by anybody so that if you choose to want to know more about that, it's not a like collection of EULAs or
Sure.
things like that to have to dig through to understand something that impacts all of us.
Sure. Yeah, I also think it's interesting how these algorithms are being used to recommend content. People who like this, like that. I took a screenshot of one of Sam's videos and didn't even think twice about the sort of what was in the banner bar on the right. And of course, what it was recommending to me was both technology and golf. And somebody pointed that out to me, like, "Oh, we know what you're interested in." It's like, yeah, I guess there's a lot of that. And when it works well, it's very cool. You can discover some things like, I didn't even know this person was putting these videos out, and they're really cool. But it can also lead you down a rabbit hole. And I've had to give my son this advice multiple times, like, hey, be careful what you're clicking on, because I know where these algorithms are primed to take people. And I think it'll be interesting to see sort of what that all looks like. And I know what any thoughts, comments around sort of the algorithmic recommendations we're all living with?
Yeah, a perspective that was shared with me is think about who that harms first. So anytime there's a brand new technology, think about like of course there's the benefit and everything you get from it, but also in the same token think about who it harms.
Mm-hmm.
So in the example you were giving, if the sources of data that these recommendation algorithms are pulling from aren't diverse and don't have a diverse representation of different backgrounds, you can then end up promoting content by the same type of people or the same
Right.
type of content, and then marginalize other perspectives and other people from the conversation entirely. And I think like there's a lot of opportunity for more awareness around like the algorithmic bias that because our society has systemic issues with many dash isms,
Mm-hmm.
it then ends up in the code bases of these platforms and ends up perpetuating those contents. And we have the ability to change that by getting more diverse perspectives involved in creating these platforms.
Right.
But there's many, many issues with that still inherent in the platforms that you're discussing.
Right. I, how do we make this more welcoming to more diverse opinions and viewpoints and backgrounds? Because I mean, I'm acutely aware of the fact that software is heavily male dominated, and I'm not a big fan of sort of that bro culture that seems to prop up from time to time in various companies. But how do we encourage more brilliant people to come into this space and not be pushed out?
You have to create the space that is welcoming to begin with. Like, so if someone's first impression of an organization has racist or um, sexist or other types of is like the first time they walk in the door, or it's not accessible to them at all, like
Mm-hmm.
that's the absolute like wrong perspective like a group would want to give. um, it's things like um, having an ongoing conversation about this like throughout versus it being a one time like, hey, we did this thing
Right.
to counteract ABC and we're done. Like it doesn't work. It's more, can you work with an organization that specializes in DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion type
Mm-hmm.
activities and have best practices from the get go to make your organization more welcoming? And a common way to do that is the people who are affected themselves. So there are many examples of um, DEI working very well
Mm-hmm.
and groups creating very focused like technology organizations, but they went in with that from the outset.
Right.
It's not really like a retrofit one and done type thing.
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking about this actually, since we've just hired, well, actually just hired two women onto our team, and we are having this conversation a little bit about that, and I didn't think my background was unique until I actually was talking with one of my previous guests on the show, Deshaun Carter, and he was telling me that his first non-white male manager was when he was at Pivotal working for Arnie, and I was kind of taken aback by that because I went back through my own history, and I think half of my managers have been women. And I didn't think that was remarkable until I started talking with well, some of the women on my team who are like, oh yeah, no, I've never worked for a woman before. And and I'm just curious, like what are your sort of experiences, thoughts around that? Again, how do we make that so that it isn't a unique experience to work for someone that doesn't look like you?
Um, a lot of it's the leadership opportunities for folks. So if you can have people of color and um, non-male folks like into the higher positions of the company, you're usually more likely to then draw in more perspectives related to that. Because yeah, I've seen the same thing. Like it's usually men,
Hmm.
and also like getting because the people are there. It's not that
Right.
you can't hire the people; they exist.
Right.
um, like that's the frustrating thing. Like you hear often, like, "Oh, the people are they're there,"
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and like so. A lot of I guess one thing that's like really hard about it is a lot of the industry is still like word of mouth and like who you
Hmm.
know and who you happen to like bump into somewhere about it, and that inherently is less inclusive because if you can't be in that location, if you can't get access to those type of people, you then can't get those opportunities.
Right.
So back to your earlier question of how do you create like places that are more inclusive, like being open to can people work from home on alternate hours and schedules and not have it be the exception, not have it be like something special or an accommodation you have to ask for, just like a part of the design to begin with.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting shift. Was talking with actually a former coworker, both of us, and she was indicating that their new policy once they go back in the office is you must be in the office, I think 3 days a week, and
Mhm.
this is causing people to leave. And I'm seeing lots of reports, not just anecdotally or by talking to a friend, but by other newspapers and stuff. Well, online, right? Nothing's really in print anymore, although we'll talk about that later. What do you think is gonna what is normal going to look like as we come out of this pandemic? Do you think there's going to be more work from home? Do you think companies who are trying to take this hard line of thou shalt be in the office are going to suffer for that? I mean, what do you think this is going to look like?
I don't really think there's a normal. I think there's a what each person like works best for them. Um, what the world might look like. Like I've heard the same thing anecdotally from other
Hmm.
people of you will be in the office on these specific days of the week, or you will be in the office for X number of days a week. You pick the days. Like I've heard different versions, but again, it's back to if the company can think about it differently and think
Right.
about it from the perspective of like I made a game with a few other teammates and we did it across the world like
Yeah.
entirely never talked on the phone once,
Yep.
and so it's possible to work from home, and um, if you think with that mindset of we're going to try to actively be more inclusive and make something like that possible, it doesn't work so well if you think about that as an afterthought or as like
Right.
a tack on.
Right.
um, what I'd like to see, like what I hope to see more usage of, is because like we were all remote like for that time period, we got a lot more accessibility tools, and
Yes.
all of the platforms like Zoom and WebEx and others got accessibility lifts so that, for instance, I can turn on automated captioning for subtitles or can turn on different features
Hmm.
to have it be more accessible. So I think the part that would be nice to keep carrying forward is there's not there's less of a income conversation if I have to live in or choose to live in another location versus a very expensive location like New York,
Right.
for instance. It it's a barrier to entry into like an entire field if I have to live in that location. So if
Right.
you take that away and say I can live anywhere and use the tools to have it be accessible to.
Appreciate the fact that they don't have a commute, and that gives you a lot of freedom to do things that you maybe couldn't do before. It gives you more time with your family, more time for your hobbies. I never enjoyed commuting, and so and I've been remote 4.5 years now, I think. So this is I can't imagine going back to an office. But different people have different desires, which is true.
And there's a great article that was several articles and a study that was done about people's enthusiasm around returning to the office. And a lot
Sure.
of conversation in that article was around how folks are experiencing less microaggressions working
Oh,
from
interesting.
home.
Interesting.
Um, so the off comments in the hallways or things that people are saying in the workplace like have happened less frequently with people working from home.
Sure, sure.
So there's of course like much bigger like systemic conversations around that, but just sort of something really interesting.
Right. Well, and I think it gives people more freedom to do the things they need or want to do, and more flexibility. A perfect example, my son had soccer practice this morning. Well, because my wife is remote, she can drop him off, and then she can go hang out at the coffee shop for a couple hours and work, and then take him to the next thing, as opposed to, well, no, I physically need to be in this space. And that made sense when we were working in a factory where, well, this is where the assembly line is, and the most efficient thing is for all of us to come to this one spot. I just need an internet connection, and I think back to when you and I were working together. um, I was in meetings with people who were 1,000 miles away all day every day, and we weren't going to be in the same physical space. So why did I need to be in this, felt covered cube, as opposed to this office? What's the difference?
Yeah. And in some ways, it like being able to work from home is more universal design oriented.
Sure.
So if you need, if you are in a physical space and would need to ask for accommodations in that space and you already have it at home,
Right.
like it removes the, but in some cases, like for me, sometimes it fear or like fear of bias that might come from needing to ask for something like that. So
Sure.
like it's definitely like from an accessibility perspective, a lot easier.
Sure. Sure. Totally. Yeah, I'm very curious to see how that all plays out, to be honest with you. I know for my wife, her organization, I think the vast majority of her coworkers are going to remain remote, even when things quiet down, or everyone's, we're on the other side of this thing. And so it has fundamentally changed them. I know lots of other organizations, same thing, where people don't even live in the state anymore. And so they're going to have to continue doing this in some way, shape, or form. But then I'm also fairly confident I'm going to be back on campus this fall to teach in person, which I kind of have mixed feelings about. I sort of enjoyed not having to drive down to the U campus and find parking, and especially in the winter. Um, but I miss seeing my students at the same time. It's really hard to present to a screen. So I don't know. I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see sort of what this all looks like, and it isn't going to be like it was in 2019. That's the one thing I feel very confident. Things have changed, and that's ultimately for the better, I suspect. But
Yeah, there's that electricity of like bouncing things back and
right,
forth, like with things in person that like that's hard to replicate, and
right.
that like I totally miss like that. Like would be awesome.
Well, I mean, I remember the week long hackathon we did with an Alexa, where I don't even remember how many of us were in this giant room, but that was really fun. And to your point, very energizing and very electric. There was a cool atmosphere, and it was very nice to just be able to kind of shout, "Hey, who's working on this?" and have someone say, "That's me." Okay, cool. Let's pair on that. Harder to do that over Zoom, but
Yeah.
there's trade-offs to all these things. So
Yeah, like we did a hackathon on a bus driving across country, and you were making your product like while you were going, and so that was definitely like that. You can't get that same
yeah,
feeling.
no. And maybe you're inspired by what you're driving past too. There's some pretty cool stuff in the U.S., to say the least.
Well, it's also a lesson in how do you build something with very spotty internet
Oh,
and
sure.
your knees being up by your face with a
Right.
laptop balanced in
Right.
between while trying to go and not sleeping at all.
And being in very close proximity to a lot of other people for a length of time as well can be challenging. That's
People you just met.
right, right. It is
It,
easier with your family. Like that's been part of it for me, as we were talking about earlier. And my wife's usually over my shoulder, and so we're still married. So clearly, the pandemic hasn't pushed us to that level. But it is different when you're around your significant other all the time. And my job usually had me traveling a lot, and so there were these very obvious breaks. And on the one hand you think, well, that sucks. On the other hand, it's like it's kind of nice to have a little space. And after 16 months, it'd be kind of nice to have just a little bit of space. And but we're privileged that we have a big enough house that we could all be on a different floor if we needed to be. We could send the kid to the basement, someone can go upstairs, and so we can distance a bit. But it's a different world when we're all jammed together and have to habitate. But so I did want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned the closed captions, and this is something that my friend Scott has talked a lot about. Is we look at a lot of these things as being there for people who have hearing issue or a sight issue, and then we don't realize how powerful they are for normal, or I shouldn't say normal, for people who don't have any of those restrictions. I think about curb cuts. When curb cuts were first introduced, this was like, oh my god, this is going to cost us so much money. But then you realize everybody uses the curb cut. My wife and I went for a bike ride on Saturday, went on this trail by our house, and they've been doing a lot of construction, so the curb cuts are all broken up. And on two wheels on a road bike, even with a half-inch difference, you can flat. I've done that. And so you start to realize how useful these are for everyone and how we can all enable that. And then closed captioning is a perfect example of that. I use that feature all the time on my Apple TV. What did she just say? Being able to skip back 15 seconds and turn on closed captioning, go, oh, okay, that's the word. Okay, I couldn't pick that up, because of the accent or because I just wasn't paying attention. So I think it's interesting to see how these technologies can be leveraged to help everybody, not just one group.
Yeah, and thinking about like universal design, like a lot of the usage can help people with different types of learning disorders, or
Mhm.
even if you um, are a type of learner who prefers to read over hearing.
Yeah.
There's many, many, many different ways, but like the most common usage of it right now is people watching like YouTube videos and the such. Like on the bus or something and not having headphones in and just being
Yep.
able to read what's being said instead of heard. But a lot of aspects of accessibility are the same way. Like
Yes.
you add in or include from the start like the ability to have high enough contrast, and then if you're in bright sunlight it's easier to see at the same time. So like you we definitely get a lot of benefits like you were talking about.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that gets into, as we were talking about earlier, some of this sort of unconscious bias that we end up putting in here. I think about some of the apps I've built or worked on where, well, I've got this big 27-inch monitor. Everybody does, right? And you realize, no, actually, a lot of people don't. So it may look great to me, but then, once I see this ironically enough with some video games, where clearly the designer who picked that font that's impossible for me to read on my couch, 10 feet away from the screen, I'm sure is very visible on the monitor they had, the distance I'm away from my monitor right now. And it's like, did no one try playing that from the couch who has bad eyes like mine? And so how do we, fix that or make that more obvious to people?
And it's back to the diversity of people who are involved in the creating
Mm,
the content to begin with. So there's another game example that when it first starts up, it speaks to you, and the data is also available so that if you use other AAC technology,
sure.
such as a auto braille reader or things like that, you can actually get access to the content before you ever hit a menu.
Sure.
So it's and they clearly thought about that like from the get-go. And the, it's definitely not the first game they've made. So
Right.
let's start there. Like they came a long way before they built a game like that. But there's other examples of there was one game when it first came out, Death Stranding, that they built into the PS4 controller a baby crying. And
Really?
if something happened in the game, you had to rock this controller of the child crying. But there was nothing in the game settings that let you shut it off. So if
Oh,
you have any sensory processing issues at all,
sure.
and the game is a controller crying, like it was unplayable. Like
Oh,
the game went, thank you.
uh-huh.
um, so and like they've probably patched this by now. It's one of those
Sure.
things like enough people probably have voted like, hey, like could you please fix this, that it's probably changed. um, but things like that, one, if you design it from planning perspective, it's the least expensive to implement at that point, and it doesn't typically add a significant cost
Right.
to development to include that. But then B, like if you then release, like give a dedicated line to, and when I say line, I mean like chat or Discord or some way for folks to then contact you about accessibility type issues, about bias type issues, because people will speak up and will use those type of channels, and then give a way to prioritize those higher than general game fixes.
Oh, sure.
So back to you were talking about democratization before. Some companies will weigh those type of fixes equally with other type of fixes
Hmm.
for products, which doesn't really work well, because if it's an accessibility fix, people can't use your site in some cases because of those accessibility issues that you
Right.
might have.
Right.
They need to, in those cases, be prioritized higher, so that people can then actually access your content.
Right.
So the same thing with like bias issues. Like you're actively harming people if you do not have a conversation about it, and if there's a need to correct something in that conversation. Like so, being able to prioritize those type of things higher is very important.
Well, and from the crassest point of view, don't you want to take my money? You know, and I know Scott has talked about this in terms of the actual number of people who have some sort of a disability where you really want to shut down that many customers. That seems counterproductive. You know, to your point, if they can't even play the game, well, they're not going to take your money and or they're not going to give you your money. So don't you want the largest possible audience for some of these things? And it you know, yeah, I think it's eye opening for people. I mean, I remember working on an application a long time ago where we went through it with a screen reader, and you know, you immediately just sort of hit your head against a table of like, wow, we really did a bad job here. And you know, it's a lot harder to retrofit, to be very clear, but it tends to make things better for everybody, you know, and not just folks who have that assistive technology.
Yeah. And creating the spaces where this can be a conversation and not like an attack in any way,
Right,
like so that, because like none of us start with like knowing these things from the get-go. Like
right,
so if you can have like casual conversations like this and understand like what you can do differently the next time, or understand, oh, I can go, you said XYZ word, I can go read more about this, like makes it so much more, even that conversation, like accessible to learn more about the topics.
right. Yeah, I was thinking about that, you know, again from a very zeroth world problem level. As my wife and I were riding down this trail when they were doing the construction, they had detours, but the detours don't work for a road bike, in my opinion. I mean, I'm sure if you're a highly skilled cyclist, you know, you can navigate it. I wasn't going to try that. I've fallen over enough times being clipped in. I didn't need to do that. And so clearly the person who put that there didn't ride bikes, didn't think about it from that perspective, didn't think about it from the perspective of someone who was maybe in a wheelchair, who would probably have had difficulty navigating that as well. And it kind of, I mean, it made me a little mad because it's like, hey, this is my tax dollars at work here, and I can't leverage this as effectively. It's less convenient. Didn't anybody think of this? And probably not, or it was just viewed as, well, sucks to be you, deal with it, get off your bike and walk and then get back on your bike.
And I think a lot of times it's not from a place of intention. So it's
No,
not someone intentionally trying to do XYZ. But with that, we can't ignore the impact of that.
right, right.
And so it's like the two halves of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't believe anyone deliberately put that there as a way of harming road cyclists, right? I mean, I know people have done that. I've seen people throw tacks on trails and stuff to keep people from riding, which is crazy to me. But it is important for us to understand that these things do have impact, and we should have a space to be able to discuss, hey, here's how this is impacting me. What can we do to make this better for everybody, not just for one sliver, and it's hard sometimes. I think people get defensive in a lot of cases when these things are brought up because they think it's an attack, and it's rarely meant to be. I mean, I guess sometimes maybe, but I think it gets back to your point of how do we create these spaces for this to happen.
And you're reminding me of, like, there are these really great workshops from Hollaback, if you've seen them, where they talked about approaches for, and there a lot of their workshops are geared toward harassment and stepping in to stop things like that. But it includes communication tenets of, like, how can you effectively talk about these things
Sure.
as a dialogue and a conversation, versus it being more of a type of attack.
Right. Right. Oh, this is not where I expected us to go today, but that's the beauty of this. We go where we go. Well, let's change gears a little bit here. I'm just curious. I'm always asking folks. So, how have you been handling the pandemic? Is there anything that you've been any new hobbies, anything you've been reading or streaming that has sort of helped, return some sense of normalcy? I am very excited that Ted Lasso is back for season 2 here on Friday. I can't wait. We're gonna rewatch season 1 again for the third or fourth time here, I'm sure, this week. So, is there anything that you've been leaning on over the last 16 months?
I did a lot of writing, and worked in communities with a lot of people writing, which it let me talk to people all around the world about their experiences during the
Nice.
pandemic at the same time, which was really cool. Um, and then a TV show I really got into, Prodigal Son,
Oh,
because of its positive portrayal of mental health,
sure,
and having that be an ongoing conversation and not be something that was like quiet and not talked about.
sure.
And so met a lot of people through that who were then working on different types of things. So that's how I got to make a game with people and got to make, like, interactive storytelling and things like that, of just fun projects. So did a lot of, like, fun projects in a bunch of different, like, backgrounds and types, because they were easy to do, working from home and making those kind of things. But yeah, it's definitely been super weird because I haven't seen, like, in person, any of my friends,
Right.
since all of this started. So yeah, so that's been super weird, but it's been nice to be able to talk with folks online.
Yeah, and I think it's. I have thought a bit about that. If this had happened 20 years ago, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, the impact would have been vastly different. The ability to do school from home, the ability for many, not everybody, to work from home, it wasn't there. The communication technology wasn't the case where you and I can sit here in borderline high def and then have a virtual happy hour if we wanted to. Just wasn't there. And, so I think in some ways, good timing, that we have these technologies. And it was a forcing function, I think, to get more people comfortable with these technologies. But to your point, it also opens up the ability to interact with people all around the world. I do think that's one of the interesting aspects of this sort of democratization, that you can connect with people anywhere, everywhere, regardless of borders and time zones, and that's very powerful.
Yeah, like, we were doing karaoke over Discord.
Oh my gosh. Uh,
uh, So that was a lot of fun. Like the Jackbox games are a really easy way to get a group of people laughing as well.
Sure,
Those kind of things.
sure. Yeah, we've done a couple of virtual tastings. We did a virtual beer tasting and a virtual whiskey tasting. That was a lot of fun. And we've done various sort of like team lunchy kind of things that have been good bonding. But I think it's again, we kind of keep coming back to this topic of like democratization, but I do think that's an interesting sort of leverage point with technology, that it gives us that ability that we couldn't have in the past. I think about even, well, when my son was really young, if I was traveling, well, you could call home, but the quality maybe wasn't great. And now with the advent of everybody having a superphone in their pocket, I could have FaceTime conversations with my son when I was on the road, and that had a hugely different impact on traveling for me, at least. And so it's interesting to see how that has changed and evolved and enabled some of these things that didn't exist 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Makes me wonder where things are going. But so tell me more about this game. You said you actually got to watch people stream it. What was that
Yeah.
like as a creator?
It was wild.
Yeah,
Because like I don't know, I make a lot of things, but like you never know like what the audience size is going to be
right.
like, or like who might end up seeing it. And so we made a fan game. It's a visual novel, and my teammate drew all the characters, and I did like the UIs and the coding behind like the game. And all of us there's a couple other people working with us too. All of us worked on the writing of the game, and then their spouse worked on the backgrounds of the game. So it was like this whole collab thing.
Sure.
And like we had worked on it for a couple months, and we're like, okay, like this is feeling like what we like we're probably good to go. And it took us a little bit longer. I think it took us like 6 months total, like
Okay.
from when they originally first had the idea to where we ended. But when the day we launched, like everybody was so excited. It was really, really, really cool to see people live playing, and then also live commenting to us about what routes they were going through and who
Sure.
they were playing with. And when they would get an ending image that my teammate drew, was like, oh, look at what I found. So like the enthusiasm was very infectious and fun.
Awesome.
And then when people streamed it, we got to see where they tripped up.
Okay.
And the what I learned a lot about in that whole experience is what types of things people like in games,
Sure.
and the type of person who likes one type of puzzle in a game might not like a different type of puzzle.
Sure.
So there were people who were like, escape room, yay! And then there
Escape room, boo.
and then there were people like, oh gosh, you're making me do this.
Right, right.
um, so that was really fun to see. And then there were also like on the other side, because this was very, very funny, there's like a chess mini game in one of them that you
Sure.
just have to survive 10 moves. Like it's just, are you going to stay alive long enough for 10 moves without losing any pieces?
Okay.
And like we
I
did
would
it that
fail.
way because
I would never get past that.
like it's very straightforward to be able to survive. Survive means like not losing a piece.
Okay.
And so most people, like when you're playing a game like that, you're not looking to play a game of chess. So
Sure.
that's why we did it that way, so that you could just survive the 10 moves. And then my sibling played, and they were like, why couldn't I play a full game of chess?
The audience is never
it's,
satisfied, Aasta.
it's very, 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 very funny.
Yeah. Well, how does it feel as a creator to see your work out there like that? And was there any sort of angst, or like, no, that's not what? Oh, that's do it this way. Oh, why didn't you do that? Like how does that feel?
I think like once it's out in the wild, it's like everybody else's like experience of it.
Sure.
And so there's not a like what you're describing of the oh no, like it's not that, because it's more exciting to see how other people explore it.
Sure.
And of course, like as a result of things, you start to find things that weren't found like in testing of it.
Right. Right.
So from there's, oh, we got to go back and fix blah 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 through all of it. But what we built into the game was a uh, as you unlocked parts of the game, it unlocked different outfits and pieces for the main character of the game,
Sure.
who is also the main character of the show that we based the game off of. So people had a lot of fun dressing up this character. And I built a way so that you could dynamically change the colors of parts of the outfit. So you could go make your main character with a bubblegum pink suit, or because my teammates' drawings like were super cool, and then we
Sure.
layered in a way to change the colors. So like it was more cool to see um, as people explored the way they express themselves through the outfits and such in the game, and what
Sure.
they found exciting or not exciting in other parts of the game. Like it was more fun than uh, at trepidation, like you were saying.
Sure. Sure. Well, and I think that's an interesting thing to see how, again, lots of our media has evolved. You go back far enough, and all TV was episodic, and each show was self-contained and had nothing other than maybe a couple characters that span shows. And now you've got these long arc shows with callbacks to season two, episode four, and oh, did you notice the color of the shirt means, and I think that's so much more immersive and more rewarding, frankly, as a consumer of that. Yeah, so it's interesting to see how folks are able to really immerse themselves in these worlds and share their own creativity on top of it. My son has been playing this sort of career variant of FIFA, and he's a goalkeeper, so he made a goalkeeper character and took that person all the way through from you're a rookie or whatever to, well, hey, I'm valued at 62 million or something, and it's like, cool. That's for him a much more fun way to interact with the game, as opposed to the sort of Pong version of we bounce the ball back and forth and that's all you can do. So it's all about democratization. Who knew that was going to be the tone of today? But is there
It was,
any? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, you go ahead.
I was going to say, is there anything you're really looking forward to as we're sort of, I want to say, approaching some new normal? I know we were touched a little bit earlier. You've got some tickets that you got coming up. Is there anything you're like fingers crossed or you're super jazzed about?
I the most important thing to me would be able to see some of my friends
Yep.
and my family in person. Um, like it'd be awesome to go see my siblings and such. But we managed to get tickets to a Broadway show in September. So I'm not sure like that'll happen depending upon like where things are at that point. But like it would be cool to do those sorts of things.
Sure.
But until then, like I don't know, just the amount I've learned from people like working on projects like we were talking about, because like in the game, like a huge thing we learned about was like my teammates really really amazing artists, and they were learning about layering and different pieces so that we could make the characters dynamically and change expressions dynamically and such. And like as they learned more about that, I also learned more about that so that I
Right.
could change like my drawing like to understand like how I could play with things like that. So
Sure.
just like more opportunities to keep working with people who have like different backgrounds and experience, because it like ultimately it ends up rubbing off and like learning more
Oh,
about it.
sure. How do you go about finding collaborators? I mean, I know you're always looking for these interesting intersections, and I mean, I'm just, I guess, lucky that I got to hang out with you, working world for a while, and I know I'm better for knowing you, but how do you find collaborators and these folks that you end up doing these really cool things with?
Um, uh, Co-working spaces when they're open was a huge place to go. There's writing workshops throughout the
Sure.
country as well, and they were going online for a while, so ended up meeting some folks through there. Um, a ton of Discord servers. So if you show up on a Discord server with background in something that you can share to like the conversation, like you're probably going to get opportunities to work with other people pretty quick. So like
Sure.
a lot of these things have mostly happened around, hey, like I have this idea to work on something to show the disparity um, invisibility of particular types of artwork? Can we work together to make a
Sure.
visualization to show something like that? It's not usually a technical conversation like that. It's more like a, hey, I care about this thing, like from the other person, and people talking about that, and you're like, oh yeah, I enjoy that too, and would love to work on that more too. And then bam, you have a thing that you're working on. It's very like ad hoc
Yeah.
type conversations.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's having that space to have that conversation. And I think that's one of the things that I've always found so amazing about what the internet has enabled, that you can have those touch points with people that you would never interact with, necessarily. And of course, it also goes the other way, where there's folks who will interact in ways that are destructive, unhealthy, trollish, whatever phrasing you want to use. And I don't know how we can we have one without the other, and how do we sort of police these spaces to make them welcoming and safe?
It Anonymity of the platforms goes a long way toward that, and the algorithms behind some of this, because we're talking about social media platforms in this case, like algorithms behind them can either promote hate speech
Hmm.
or do work to get rid of it. And what I've personally found is some of them actually promote it much more than like I would like as
Sure.
a creator, and actually make it quite difficult to get rid of it. Um, so if you're on Instagram and holding a live video session, like you can report somebody as like flag it for investigation, but it doesn't necessarily happen immediately during the
Sure.
stream that you're having.
Sure.
Same thing on Twitter, like you can go report an issue, but it's not like instantaneous. And because things move so quickly, they can have like significant harm. So if like there's a lot of work to do, like from a systemic perspective behind the platforms, to make them safer for people involved.
Yeah, I give Twitch a lot of credit for that. I think I've mentioned this before, but I have gotten some trolling, I guess, to be the politest way to put it, in the comment section, and tip of the hat to the Twitch folks for blocking it right away. And whenever I've reported it, within 12 hours, I usually get a response back saying, "Yep, took care of it." And and I guess the part that I'm still amazed at is there's people who that's like a hobby for them to log in and create a new account and then try to bomb on someone's thing. I don't understand. Like, if you don't like what I'm talking about, then just don't watch. Why do you need to try to inject yourself into the conversation? But I don't know.
It's
Uh,
definitely a power conversation, and yeah, like
Right, right. Although I guess it's like these people who want to get on TV. The Tour de France just wrapped up, and there was an early crash caused by someone who stuck their sign out into the
their
road,
sign, yeah.
because they wanted to get on TV. And then there was somebody who was riding their bike in a weird way with a dinosaur suit on or something, and they got what they wanted. They're on TV. They were part of the clip package, and it's like, oh, great. So I guess I can kind of understand it, but it's sad to me that we even have to block those things.
So
That
my teammate taught me like a really great way to handle this. So
yeah.
they're very uh, they use the block feature very vigorously,
Hmm.
to the tune of thousands of accounts at a time, to curate their experience.
Yeah.
And I learned from them like how to do that, because the platforms were unusable. Like
Right.
I the only social media I use today is Twitter,
Yeah.
and only a small amount because it's the only way to get like, or a way to get art out into the world and
True.
writing out into the world and have conversations. Um, but like using the block features so that you can curate your experience and have like a more positive
Right.
type thing in that space definitely helps a lot. It's not a cure-all though.
No. Yeah. No, I'm with you. I've had to block my fair share of folks. Probably not to the extent others have, but it does make things better when you're like, oh, good. Or mute. Mute is one of my favorites. Just okay. I'm just not going to see anything from you, and that will make my life better. So. All right, well, let me throw a few lightning round questions at you, and I'm always curious to see where this goes and see how much I know about you. Coffee, espresso, or tea?
Tea.
Okay. Okay, that was going to be my guess. Pie or cake?
Neither.
Neither. Okay, what is your dessert of choice?
Um,
Oh, I've stumped
I
her.
will. I. Yeah, that's not something I'm good at. But
Okay.
the lemon pie filling by itself.
Oh, by itself. Okay. See, I've eaten enough meals with Neil Ford at this point that I can quite confidently order for him, and he can quite confidently order for me. Like if we're gonna order dessert, we usually play this game of, okay, I think you're gonna have, and he's like, and I know you're gonna have, and we're right about 90% of the time. Oceans or mountains? Which would you prefer to be near?
Oh wow, that's hard.
You can always say both.
Both.
Yeah, see, my son wants to trade some of our lakes for some of Colorado's mountains, and so far he's not been successful in getting them to take us up on that trade because we've got lots of lakes, so we can certainly trade a few of those.
We were talking. A friend lives in Australia, and it's going to be a long time before she can get out of there.
Hmm.
And so we were talking about she could go swimming in the ocean there, and we could go swimming in the ocean here, and we would be in the same water. So that could be
Yep,
the connector for the
yep.
time being.
Well, it's funny you mention that because when my family and I got to go to Australia a couple years ago or 3 years ago, I can't remember. Time has no meaning anymore for me. And we very deliberately made the effort to go to one of the beaches, and I don't remember which one, to stick our feet in the ocean so that we could say, and we've been in that ocean on this side and on that side, and yeah, yeah, it's very cool. How about food trucks or Michelin stars?
Food trucks.
Nice, good call. Now this one I'm actually very curious about because we didn't I didn't ask you a specific question along these lines, and that's bad on me. But ebooks versus paper books.
Neither.
Okay, all right. What are we reading these days?
I usually prefer my content on a website
Okay,
where you can. It usually comes in shorter, like short story form, like directly from the small like
sure.
chat book or like individual curator.
Gotcha, gotcha. You know, I maybe I should. I'm going to put a pin in that. I'm going to come back to that because I do want to get your thoughts on innovative technology and publishing. Um, now this one I'm curious about because I very distinctly remember the time you told me you'd never seen Star Wars, and I had this sort of visceral reaction to that. But then you told me you watched it, and I felt better. But Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings?
Neither.
Okay, okay, that was going to be my guess. How about DC versus Marvel?
Neither.
Okay, okay. Action, comedy, or drama?
Drama.
Okay, okay. See, this is one of the things that I so appreciate about you is because your answers are not the sort of typical geek answer. So you add a much needed dose of that to my life. Um, Notes app or notebook?
Neither.
Okay, what do you sketch on? What do you keep your notes in? I mean, probably
I
that steel trap of a brain of yours.
no, 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 no. um, Sketch on, usually Procreate.
Okay.
Write in, usually Bear.
Oh,
Um, Add the quick notes, usually Post-its.
gotcha. Are you a night owl or do you prefer to get up at the crack of dawn?
Um, Night owl, sometimes dawns other times. Like if I'm making stuff, like if I'm making stuff, I'll be up all night all the
Sure.
time. Or like if I'm not well, like I'll be up all night all the time. But if I have the choice to like go on a trip and like explore somewhere, like I want to be up first in the day so that you
Sure.
get the whole time
Sure.
exploring the place.
Yeah, that's fair. I've never quite understood the people who go on vacation and then they spend most of their time in the hotel. Like, why? The hotels, and I know this from experience, they all look the same. I mean, I've had that experience of waking up in a hotel and having to sort of like go through my brain and think, what city am I in? Because a lot of Marriotts look a lot alike. Um, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this one. Cats or dogs?
I like both, but I have cats.
Yeah, yeah, me too. And I'm a little disappointed. Neither, excuse me, neither of our cats has made an appearance here. Kind of hoping one or both of them would show up for me at least. But um, tabs or spaces?
Neither.
Okay, good answer.
Like, let's talk about more important things than formatting.
See, this is what happens once you become an architect, right? You start to realize that this dogmatic adherence to certain things, it's like it's really not that important. If you
Like
want to use
whatever,
tabs, use
yeah.
tabs.
Use whatever formatter works for you on your side, and then get it to translate to some common format.
Amen to that. All right, so let me go back to this because I definitely want to touch on this before we call it a day here. You kind of work in the publishing space. What sort of things do you see going on in how we deliver this kind of content, consume this kind of content? I mean, where do you think that space is going, and what are you excited about there?
There, I'm excited about opportunities to raise marginalized creators and provide their content the visibility that it deserves, and hearing from underrepresented voices and underrepresented stories and seeing those kind of things. Like that's what excites me the most about that space, is getting more of that content out there. You asked something else I forgot.
Well, yeah. So what do you think is, we talked about sort of like ebooks versus paper books. I tend toward the ebook just because I can, keep it all on one device. I can carry the device with me, and I've got thousands of books. I can't bring my whole bookshelf with me if I'm going somewhere, right? Um, but I think there are still other ways to deliver that content, and I think that's kind of what you're talking about in terms of I prefer to read it in sort of a web format. And I've noticed this with myself. I'm really used to scrolling, and then I read an ebook, and I can't scroll the page because it's a page. And I mean, what do you think? Are we going to break out of this format that a book is a book and I can't just sort of scroll my way through it? I mean, what do you think is coming from that perspective, or what would you like to do as a creator?
Yeah, I think there's one-off type opportunities for other presentation type
Hmm.
mediums right now. But like for general consumption, you're probably going to see the ebook, physical book, audiobook
Sure.
type realm continue. Like ebook, like what you're talking about, like that gives a lot of opportunities from a accessibility perspective and being able to make the content available in a way that works for you as the reader.
Right.
So that I definitely like a lot about the content. Some of those readers still aren't accessible, which is
Yeah.
why I tend toward also like length of content and variety of content and representation of content is usually better in other forms on web. So tend to gravitate there more, where I can use tools to make the browser behave like however I need it to behave,
Right.
and can look at the content in short enough bursts because I don't have the attention to be able to sit through the whole book. Like,
Yeah, that's a great point. Again, I mean, it's that giving you control over that experience, and there's a lot of power in that. I mean, I think about just the ability to change the font size and make it bigger or smaller, or change the font to something that you find more appealing. And I've certainly done that. I've seen plenty of people do that. I know my father-in-law, that's part of why he loves his Kindle, is he's able to change the font and make it easier for him to read. And oh, why that to me is a huge win over, well, no, you can have the font that we printed it in, and you'll just have to learn to like it.
yeah, I had a really amazing experience with that last week. Actually, had to take like one of those standardized exam type things,
Sure.
and um, the group was open to doing it over Zoom with the settings on my computer, like however I wanted. And they do this for every single person who comes in,
Sure.
and they proctor it remotely, and like so someone has to sit there and watch while you do it, which is still comedic to me for other reasons. But
Right.
uh, it's all based in a web browser, and you can
Sure.
apply your accessibility tools to that setting. And they still have like some issues because the platform they're working with hasn't uploaded enough some of the features,
Sure.
unfortunately. But it's definitely much more um, accessible than like other experiences I've had with that in the past.
Sure, sure. Well, Asta, I know I could talk to you for as long as you would hang out on Zoom with me, but
Right
I'm
back at you.
right, but I'm sure you have more important things to do than hang out with me. So I think we will leave it there. And I just want to thank you so much for spending some time with me. It's been a joy, and I'm just, so delighted that you said yes when I pinged you. And see, I missed the fact because when I travel, I would always like text you when I get to New York just to let you know, just as a professional courtesy, that I was in your part of the world. And then I would have a good excuse to sort of go back and forth with you for a while. And then I'm like, well, God, I haven't done that in forever. So I'm just like, all right, I'm just gonna ping her, and there you go. So thanks for saying yes. All right, well, we'll be back next week. I have Sharat from Oracle is going to be talking to us. I'm sure we'll get into Java in some way, shape, or form. But until then, everybody have a good week. And thanks again, Ace. I appreciate it.